Were the stars right to write to the letter?
Or did they have any choice? I mean, most of them were on the BBC payroll, so I'm sure there was a fair amount.
Some of them aren't.
Some of them aren't, but 90% of them are, and I think there would be a fair amount of coercion. It's clear that the BBC are a great media organisation, and they've opened up a sort of media bombardment to defend themselves. They've never been keen on cuts, and they say not keen on cuts by the government to the BBC funding.
I love the idea of Dame Judi Dench, David Attenborough, J.K. Rowling being forced to write a letter to the Daily Telegraph. These people are actually, they know about the importance of the BBC for their country's creative future and for the originality and the quality of the programmes that it produces. I can assure you, not one of those people were under any duress to put their signatures to that letter.
I mean, I'm a little puzzled as to what we're arguing about, because I thought that John Whittingdale, the Culture Secretary, had already announced the BBC settlement for the medium term, a little bit above inflation. So what's there to discuss?
Well, CPI, the licence fee to say CPI, potentially 650 million to pay for concessionary over 75 licence fees by 2020, 2021. However, what will happen at charter renewal will be a study of what the BBC's remit is going to be going forward. It is rather cart before horse to settle what the income stream is before the remit is decided and the scope of the BBC, and that will need to be decided. But I would maintain that any funding mechanism for the BBC predicated on the owning of a television and viewing live television is not sustainable for the next 10 years.
Well, Professor Barnett, I mean, this letter says hands off our BBC, basically, but by making it untouchable, doesn't it just create essentially an institution which has a danger of being out of date, out of touch, and frankly isn't providing value to its viewers?
I don't think a single one of those signatories would suggest that the BBC should be untouchable. What we're talking about is a politically motivated attack. There was a debate in the House of Lords last night where Lord Fowler, Norman Fowler, who served in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet and John Major's cabinet in the last two Conservative governments, said the BBC was under an unprecedented attack, political attack. There were other Conservative peers, Chris Patten, Michael Grade, who were making exactly the same point. This is coming from the Conservative side of the political spectrum. I'm not usually one to exaggerate these kinds of things, but I actually think that in the BBC's history, the attack that it's facing now, and it's an attack from the government, not from licence payers, not from ordinary people, not from ordinary parliamentarians, but from the government, is deeply dangerous, and it's the independence of the institution that is under threat.
I might sit on the government benches, but I'm not part of the government. The BBC tell me constantly they're world class, but they're very resistant to going to a subscription model where they could demonstrate they're world class.
I mean, why do you... I mean, you think the BBC should be clipped back a bit? I mean, let's be honest about this. Why do you think that?
Well, I think the licence fee itself is an anachronism. It's been around since about 1947, when there was no choice in media. The BBC were the television.
So do it from direct taxation like the Germans, for example, still similar sort of levels of spending?
Well, it's only right that at a time of austerity, when public services are being, reduced payments, that the BBC should take some of that. And also, what should the BBC do? They put £174 million a year into their internet content. That's treading on the toes of local newspapers. The BBC, the way it's funded, can park its tanks on anyone's lawn.
Sorry, this is a complete myth. This is a complete myth. In the last
well, it is
charter
part of the
review,
public service, and the public service is being squeezed, whether people like it or not.
And whatever the state decides to do, the public sector remove themselves from.
First of all, Andrew talked about the BBC parking its tanks on other people's lawns. In the last charter review, the government introduced, the last government introduced the concept of service licences. So every single one of the BBC services has a very clear set of purposes laid down, which are agreed with the trust and after consultation with competitors. They cannot exceed, they cannot change those purposes, they cannot introduce a new service. So there is no question of the BBC interfering with other people's, other organisations.
Well, they do tend to occupy other people's territory.
They are part of
them out. We have seen that repeatedly.
They are part of the market. They are part of the market, and they always have been.
They're not part of the market because they don't compete in the market.
No.
They don't compete for revenue in the market. They occupy the market.
They compete for audiences.
They distort the market.
They distort the market in the way that the NHS...
They're the biggest broadcaster, and they don't have to worry about where their money comes from.
Do you think the NHS distorts the market for healthcare?
Obviously.
Then in that sense, I agree with you.
Well, the BBC...
I'm not saying the market for healthcare is necessarily a good thing, but clearly
Okay.
There is not a market for healthcare because it's provided by the state.
In that sense, I agree with you. And what happens is that as a democracy, we make a decision as to whether we want that kind of intervention in the market because it's in the
who makes that
good.
decision then?
Parliament.
Love is all,
Not
Parliament.
the government, but Parliament.
To put things in perspective,
I have a question
the
for
BBC is a leviathan. It's got a budget twice the size of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office annually, and if you include BBC Worldwide, the so-called commercial arm, which is a bit of a joke in itself, it's the size of the budget of the United Nations.
I have a question for Andrew. Is he prepared to allow, after the consultation, to allow the results of that consultation to go to a vote in both Houses of Parliament and for the government to abide by the result of those votes in both Houses of Parliament?
I'm sure that the parliamentarians will have an ability to put their views forward. At the end of the day, it's for the minister to decide and negotiate through charter renewal. That's the way it's done. That's the problem, and that undermines the BBC's independence. Incidentally... But the BBC, you say, is so popular that it has to resort in criminality to force people to pay the licence fee, and we have 150,000 people a year getting a criminal record for non-payment.
We have a report,
it's a regressive
independent
tax.
report tomorrow from David Perry.
We've got plenty more to talk about, and of course we get the Green Paper tomorrow, so hopefully we can carry on the discussion after that as well. Great to talk to you both. Thank you.